Yeah, let's go. Coming down into turn one, you'll obviously be in fifth gear, and you want to use all of this curbing on the left side before you turn in. You want to turn in full throttle, and I personally like to turn in a little bit later than most people. So even though I have to slow down a tiny bit more at the apex, I can get on the throttle very early, heading up into turn two. But there's two ways to drive this corner. Both of them you want to turn in still full throttle, but for one of them you simply want to lift just to obviously slow down a little bit, but also to get the car to rotate a little bit. But the way I prefer though is to lift, but also just brush the brakes a tiny bit to get the car to rotate even more, just so that I can get on the throttle fairly early. There's two ways you can also drive this corner. You can use about half of the curb or not use it at all, and I think they're both just as quick. Just because obviously if you use the curb, you're covering a little bit less distance and you can make your radius a little bit wider. But the curb itself is fairly slippery, so you do lose a little bit of grip that way. And it sort of evens out with keeping it on the actual pavement that's a little bit more grippy, but makes you cover more distance and cover a tighter radius. So really, it's up to you. You can drive this corner both ways. Either way, you should be able to get back on the throttle right around this point. So while you're still on the curb, you should be able to get on the throttle. If you're already off the curb and getting on the throttle, that's you're likely going in a little bit too fast. So you just want to slow it down a little bit more on entry, lift earlier, brush the brakes if you are brushing the brakes a little bit more, just so that you can get on the throttle while you're still on the curb. And most laps, I'll be looking to use as much space as I can on exit. I won't really sacrifice my exit out of turn one. And more often than not, I'll have to use this curbing on the left side. And even if you go this wide, it's not too hard to bring the car back over about a car's width to the right side of the track, which is more or less what I do just to set up for turn two. And turn two, you want to drive turn two as a double apex corner. It's sort of similar if some of you guys drove Silverstone last season. It's in a way similar to that second to last corner at Silverstone, that long right-hander where you want to apex twice as well. And same as here, you want to point the car into the corner and brake in a straight line, and then just let the car and the speed that the car is carrying bring it a little bit just wide of the inside of the corner. And then as the corner goes on, the car will slowly start to come closer and closer to the left side, and you'll finally hit your final apex. The way I'm driving this is, again, I'm bringing the car over about a car's width over to the right side, setting up for the corner, and then I'll turn in, still full throttle, and get the car at around this sort of angle. So I really want to run over that inside curb. I want to run over all of it as I'm braking in a straight line. And just before I actually get to it, sort of around this point is where I would hit the brakes. And obviously, it's very, very important to make sure you have your wheel perfectly straight for this part, just so that you don't get the rear of the car sliding or anything like that. And while you're braking in a straight line, you can take advantage of this and downshift twice into third, which is the gear that you'll use through this long corner. So just make sure you get those two downshifts out of the way while the car is still in a straight line, just so that you don't get any snapping of the rear later on in the corner. You're still braking as you're running over the curb. You want to keep your steering wheel straight. And then as you're turning in, you also want to just carry the brakes ever so slightly as you're turning in, just to help the car rotate a little bit better. And you should be carrying enough speed through here so that between that apex, between where I got off throttle and on the brakes, all the way up to where I'll actually get on the throttle to exit the corner, you want to carry enough speed through this corner that you don't have to touch the throttle whatsoever throughout the middle of the corner. So you really want to avoid any sort of mid corner throttle through this corner, for every corner pretty much, but particularly for this corner. And you want to carry enough speed so that the car also runs a little bit wide. So it should probably be about this far over to the right side. So it's just over a car's width away from the inside of the corner. And then approaching the second apex and the exit of the corner, I'm using that Marshall's booth on the left side. That kind of looks like a tire for it. I'm using that as a reference to know when to get back on the throttle, simply because it's such a long corner and it also blocks the view of the exit that it's very hard to gauge where to get back on the throttle otherwise. I'm looking to get on the throttle just before I pass by that Marshall's post. I might be on the throttle tiny bit later than that, but what I'm looking to get out of this corner is to be able to get on the throttle just before I pass by it. So right around here is ideally where I should be getting back on the throttle. And by this point, by the time you get on the throttle, the car should also already be starting to get closer and closer to the inside curbing as well. And so you'll get on the throttle, and then you use all of this inside curbing, get it as tight and close as you can. And on exit, just use as much space as you need. Don't feel like you have to straighten the wheel just to run this curve, because you'll end up just traveling a necessary extra amount of distance. Just keep it as tight as you can. The same thing as you go down this curvy straight, you don't need to keep it all the way over to the right side of the track before turning in. You can just drive at a diagonal to cover least distance. And then coming up to the hairpin, you'll be coming in here in 5th gear. So you're going to want to drop 4 gears into 1st gear. I'm braking at around this point, about 10 meters before the 100 marker on the left side. And an important thing here is also, I think I found that if I keep the car completely on the pavement as I start to brake, I'll usually be able to slow the car down a little bit better in time for the corner. Whereas if you get your left side tires on the curb as you start braking, your braking won't be as efficient, as there'll be quite a difference in grip between either side of the car, and you have to adjust for the side that has the least grip. So you're just better off keeping it on the pavement. And another thing you want to do as you hit the brakes here is to just ever so slightly angle the car a tiny bit into the corner. It's not a huge amount, but you wanna angle the car enough so that by the time you turn in, there's about a car's width between you and the edge of the track. So around here where I start to turn in, there's a car's width between me and the grass on the left side. So you just want to angle it a tiny bit, but it definitely does help. And through here, it'll be a common theme for this track, but all of these smooth curves that you get on this track, basically all the curves that don't rumble, but they're just smooth curves as opposed to rumble strips, you want to avoid them most of the time just because they're fairly slippery and you lose a bit of grip going over them. So you want to carry enough speed going into here so that the car gets as close as possible to those curves, but you don't ever actually ride them. And then on exit, it's very tempting to get on the throttle as early as you can through here, but if you end up having to use the astroturf after the curve, you're covering too much distance. So really try to get on throttle late enough so that you only need to use the curbing and not the astroturf, even though you don't get an off-track penalty. And then coming up to the second hairpin, through this hairpin in particular, it's very, very important to really think about how early you get on the throttle coming out of here, because there's a fairly long stretch of acceleration between this corner and the next, and that long left-hander that starts off the last sector. So you really want to maximize your speed going down that straight, and you want to do that by getting on the throttle as early as you can. And basically I'm braking just as that white triangle after the curving ends. So right after it is where we'll start to get on the brakes. And I'm getting on the brakes pretty much perfectly parallel to the edge of the track. I won't be turning in yet. And you want to turn in fairly late for this corner. Again, so you ensure that you're getting on the throttle as early as you can. And once again, you want to carry enough speed that the car doesn't go too tight as to actually use the smooth curving on the inside here. So you're going to carry enough speed that you just miss that, and you should be able to get on the throttle at around here. So really, the earlier you can get on the throttle here, the better. And on exit, obviously, use all of that flat curving as well. All right. So now coming up to turn 10, this really long left-hander. It'll become a lot easier if you keep the car in fourth gear, which is definitely doable in default weather and even slightly colder weather. If you get a really cold session, you might need to go up into fifth gear, but no matter how good your exit was out of that second hairpin, if you're running default weather, you won't ever need to go up to fifth. So try to keep the car in fourth, and you'll also keep the car in fourth throughout this whole corner. You don't need to worry about gear shifts through here. And the way I'll drive this corner, so I'll keep the car in fourth gear, and I'll use that escape road on the left side that cuts through the grass. I don't know if you can see it, but there's an escape road that basically just cuts through the grass on the left side. I'm simply turning in at around this point, maybe 30 meters before that escape road meets the track. And what I'm actually using that reference for is to start brushing the brakes just before I start to go past it on the left side. So right around here is where it started to brush the brakes a tiny bit. And I'm talking between 5 and 15%. So it's a very minimal amount of braking through here. The focus really isn't to slow the car down as much as it is to get the car to rotate nicely. So I'll be just brushing the brakes. And what I'm looking for in this corner is to apex fairly early. So at around here is where I get up on the curb as much as I can, get it as close to the grass as I can. And it's very important through this corner to just carry enough speed so that you're able to do that and keep it fairly tight on the curb as you go past the apex, but also carry enough speed so that, so I don't know if you can see it or you've probably heard it by now, but halfway down this curb, it stops being a rumble strip and it turns into that slightly higher soft curbing. Ideally, what you want to do is apex it as tight as you can, but carry enough speed so that the car naturally starts to drift wide and only just misses that soft curbing on the inside just as it starts. And after that, I'll be coasting. I'll be completely off the throttle, just letting the car coast. And a little bit later on, I'll start to get on the throttle, still in fourth gear. And obviously, the car will drift a little bit over to the right side. But as long as it doesn't drift further than about the middle of the track, so around here, as long as it doesn't drift any wider than this, it should be really easy to get it back over to the left side of the track in time to brake for this next hairpin. And for this hairpin, I'm braking at the 50 marker. You really want to try to brake as late as you can through here, because there's definitely some time to gain under braking here. But it's also important to keep in mind that because you're at a downward slope, this particular part of the track has a slight downhill slope to it. You can't threshold brake as hard as you would for any other corner, really. So you just need to be a little bit softer on the brake so you don't lock the wheels. And just keep that in mind as you brake, and you again want to keep it parallel to the edge of the track, fairly parallel. Don't point it into the corner as much. And you're also dropping down 3 gears all the way down into second. And through this hairpin, obviously the most important part is to
Second
get on
or
the
first?
throttle. First gear. Yeah.
Right.
And the most important thing for this particular corner is obviously your exit, because you get a really long, really long stretch of acceleration that goes from here all the way over to turn one at the start of the next lap. So you really want to, for the remainder of the lap, you don't want to have to lift off at all. So you really try to get on throttle as early as you can. Really get on top of this flat inside curbing as much as you can, and also get on the throttle as early as you can. And actually, I think a tip I forgot to mention through here is to just turn in just a hair earlier than you expect, simply because the downward slope of the track also pushes you out wide a little bit. So you have to almost compensate for that a little bit by turning in slightly earlier. And with that, you should be able to cut the corner as much as you can, and crucially get on the throttle as early as you can. So as I'm still on the curb, I should be able to get back on the throttle completely, and the car shouldn't drift any wider than middle of the track once again. So this is probably the widest I'd want to be coming out of that hairpin. If I did drift that wide, I could bring the car back a tiny bit over to the right side, setting up for the second and last corner. And for these two last corners, they're obviously full throttle, but to help you drive them full throttle, another tip is to also really try to miss those curbs on the inside, because once again, they're one of those really slippery, smooth curbs that'll more often than not also make the car bounce and send you a little bit wide. So really try to avoid them. And again, the last corner, you're also purposefully turning in a little bit later so that you don't have to touch that curbing at all. And then on exit, again, use as much of the room as you need, not as much as you can. Yeah, that would be the lap.
I'd just like to say thank you again to Johnny for taking the time to give us a walkthrough. If you would like more help from Johnny, he also does private coaching sessions. You can find his contact information down below in the description if you're interested. Johnny was kind enough to share his replay of his time trials with us again this week, so we're going to go to that. Enjoy.